We just need more empathy and compassion. Or do we? Won't someone please think of the children? This phrase originates from a 1964 Disney film, Mary Poppins, where Mrs. Banks pleads with her departing nanny to stay for the sake of the children. This appeal to empathy was later satirized as a comedic catchphrase in The Simpsons, when the character Helen Lovejoy makes the same appeal, trying to frame her position as being in support of the vulnerable. But how can empathy be subject to satire? Empathy and compassion are concepts that are easy to hold as always good, and that we all need to have more of for the betterment of humankind. But are they actually always a good thing? And are they the basis for solid moral judgment? This short reflection will pull on research from psychologist Fritz Breithout and thoughts from philosopher Jesse Prince, which call into question the absolute authority of empathy and compassion, especially within the context of doing what is right and what is good. We will look at definitions of these concepts and then explore the pitfalls that might await the unwary, and perhaps open our minds to a more productive outlook on the trials of life. So what are empathy and compassion? Empathy as a word and concept was introduced into English in 1909 by psychologist Edward Bradford, and means the ability to understand and enter into the feelings and emotions of another, or to experience the world from their point of view. Prior to this, the English language relied on sympathy to explain this experience, which means feelings of pity or sorrow for someone else's misfortunes. In his research article, Breithout describes empathy as the co-experience of a situation with another. Compassion is described by Wikipedia as a social feeling that motivates people to go out of their way to relieve physical, mental, or emotional pain of others or themselves. Verywellmind.com describes compassion as empathy in action. Empathy and compassion are bedfellows, one catalyst, the other the action. However, as Prince points out, a key thing to note is that our empathy and compassion depend on our perception of the circumstances of another, not on what they're actually feeling or experiencing. This is our projection onto another, a mental colonialism, if you will. We may, as a consequence, imagine them to be feeling in a way in which they are not. So why do we have these qualities? From an evolutionary standpoint, it's believed that these qualities are pro-social and encourage us to cooperate with tribes and even across tribes by being able to share in each other's experiences. This concept ties to the psychological concept of theory of mind, which is the ability to understand something from the point of view of another, which is critical to effective communication and negotiation. In neuroscience, empathy has been associated with the concept of mirror neurons, which were identified in the 1990s. These are understood to provide an internal representation of other people's actions or experiences or intentions, and are believed to be important for social learning and social cognition. Empathy and compassion certainly possess very powerful positive aspects, but is this always the case? Can empathy and compassion go wrong, or even be used to cause harmful outcomes for others? The dark side of empathy, then. One of the core concerns with empathy is the tendency to use it as a moral compass. The experience of empathy makes us feel better about ourselves as human beings. We take it to make us a good person on the right side of history, even if circumstances we are empathizing with are clearly negative. This aspect of empathy therefore makes potentially susceptible to other intentions. We can require people to be victims to feed this habit, encouraging a culture of victimhood. We also find a sense of meaning through empathy for others when campaigning on their behalf. We become the saviours. This can be further magnified by joining others with similarly aligned views, and we have a powerful intoxication of purpose and community which makes us feel righteous. These conditions weaken our capacity for reason because we are protective of this delightful cocktail of emotional security. Big picture blindness. We also find ourselves overlooking big picture needs and potential solutions because our empathy is hijacked by a proverbial kitten stuck in a tree, whereby we fail to notice the slow rise of waters that might drown us. We are at risk of our empathy for a single perceived victim obscuring wider issues or more pressing needs which do not trigger our empathy in such a dramatic way. We see this play out in politics, where politicians walk the tightrope of being driven by public opinion over their most pressing concerns and having to decide which policies and groups to direct attention to, whilst minimising the potential alienation of and negative impacts to others. The optics require that politicians appear to be empathetic to voters whilst introducing policies that work. Empathy hijack fails genuine victims. Modern Western attitudes rely heavily on models of social construction, which lead us to overly empathize with the doers of negative actions and behaviors. We're encouraged to look beyond the antisocial or criminal act and think about the person beneath with their life story. Sam Harris makes an analogy here with Uday Hussein, eldest son of Saddam Hussein, who was by all moral counts a terrible human being. Sam invites us to consider that at some point Uday was a child, with all the inherent innocence of a child who was by circumstances of his environment turned into the monster he no doubt became. Sam has done this deliberately to invite us to practice a specific, powerful mindfulness tool of metta, which translates to loving awareness or compassion. But the point illustrates the logical conclusion of the constructivist approach. We also see cultural reworkings of modern Disney tales where the villains of old, Maleficent, Cruella de Vil, etc., are having their stories retold to make them sympathetic victims of their lives rather than the villain that we know. The practical extension of this can be found in the justice system, where harsher sentencing will likely be given where victims appear visibly distressed, and lesser sentencing if the perpetrator is perceived to be remorseful. This is further played out in the UK via non-crime hate incidents, where an allegation of distress and suffering is made by someone who is then accepted by default as being a victim of this non-crime. Empathy for the perpetrator can make us fail to connect empathetically with the victim. This can make us fail to hold bad behaviour to sufficient account, which results in negative consequences to innocent parties. Empathy can create division. We cannot help but be aware of the significant number of global challenges and increasing political polarity in the world right now. Empathy with one side creates the outcome of othering the other, and the perceived plight of one group leads to the ignoring or discounting of the plight or position of the other. This results in an us and them mindset, and we lose empathy for the chosen out group and reinforce empathy with our chosen in group. This results in a loss of critical objectivity and can have incredibly important ramifications, especially when the object of the othering inevitably spreads to an entire race, social class, or political mindsets. We all preach tolerance so long as the tolerance aligns with our chosen target of empathy. However, perceived or actual intolerance of the same target is met with no empathy at all. So where does this leave us? Neither Prinz or Breithout are campaigning against empathy or saying that we're better off without it, but they are highlighting the dangers of applying empathy as a moral foundation, and that there are profound consequences of letting empathy loose uncritically on the circumstances we find in life. In Breithout's own words, his aim is not to reject empathy as a common or potentially desirable basis for behaviour, including positive pro-social behaviour, but rather to disconnect empathy from morality in order to align it more closely with aesthetic perception. As always, it's not a question of either empathy or no empathy. It's a yes and. We do not want to live in a world without empathy and compassion. However, we should be mindful that these qualities can cloud our judgment, encourage irrationality, and create division between us. We need to walk the tightrope of human emotion with sound reason and walk lightly in order to try and ensure the best outcome. Thanks for listening.